Hey guys, tonight we're drifting into the watery world of the Aztecs. More specifically, their ingenious and oddly soothing floating gardens known as chinampas. Picture this. The year is somewhere around 1450, and you're stepping barefoot onto a spongy, fertile plot of land. But this isn't land in the way you know it. It floats. Sort of. The air smells of damp earth and lake mist. Birds screech lazily in the distance. You wobble slightly, wondering if this farm is about to sink under your weight. It doesn't. Because tonight you're entering Tenochtitlan, the shimmering heart of the Aztec Empire, where people grew crops on artificial islands that almost never sank, which is more than we can say for most modern houseplants. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You arrive at dawn, the sky's pale blue, cottony with mist. Canoes glide past, paddles slicing the surface of Lake Texcoco with a practiced rhythm. You're not walking on a street. You're crossing one of the thousands of canals that divide the city. There are more waterways here than in Venice, though historians still argue whether the Aztecs had a word for gondola. Tenochtitlan, the capital, is humming awake. You can hear it in the rustle of market mats being laid down, the creak of reed rafts, and the subtle splash of water against stone. The entire city appears to float, temples rising from platforms anchored in the lake bed, houses flanked by moats, people navigating life with paddle in hand. It's like civilization got tired of land and said, you know what, let's just build everything on water. You squint toward the horizon and see it, verdant strips of greenery floating like emerald rugs across the lake. These are chinampas, the beating heart of the Aztec food system. Unlike the name floating garden might suggest, they don't bob around like rafts. Instead, they're woven into the lake bed, anchored by willow trees and reinforced by generations of labor, lake sediment, and occasionally, stubborn optimism. You paddle closer, your canoe gliding past ducks and the occasional smug turtle. The air is thicker here, alive with the scent of marigolds and maize. You pass a man using a pole to steer his small boat. His cargo is a mix of squash, chili peppers, and flowers arranged so beautifully it makes you question your grocery list. He nods at you without breaking his rhythm, as if to say, yes, this is how we live, floating and growing. The Aztecs didn't choose this waterlogged region out of whimsy. They were pushed here by rival tribes and tough geography. But instead of sulking about their swampy fate, they turned it into an agricultural miracle. Chinampas allowed them to feed a population of up to 200,000 people. Imagine a floating farm-to-table movement long before hashtags or overpriced avocado toast. As you glide past one of the gardens, a boy waves. His feet are caked in mud, his grin is missing a tooth, and he's carrying a tiny clay pot filled with water and herbs. For the maize, he tells you proudly. You nod, pretending you totally know how maize works. Nearby, a woman tends to rows of amaranth, tiny red blossoms dancing like little flames in the breeze. She hums to herself, a melody older than the empire itself. Her chinampa is fringed with willows, their roots drinking deeply from the water, while their branches shield the crops from wind and gossip. The architecture of these gardens is deceptive in its simplicity. At the base is a layer of reeds and sticks, layered with lake muck and compost, then topped with rich soil dredged from the lake bed. Some gardens are lined with woven mats. Others are framed with logs or clay bricks. None of it seems sturdy, yet here they are, holding up rows of tomatoes, beans, sunflowers, and chilies. Mainstream historians agree that this system was remarkably efficient. Chinampas yielded up to 7 harvests a year. That's a lot of salsa. But what's even more impressive is how self-sustaining they were. Water from the lake seeped in naturally. Waste from the city was composted and reused. Even the canals acted like slow-moving refrigerators, keeping food cool during hot spells. And yet, there are questions historians still can't quite answer. Did the Aztecs rotate crops with lunar cycles? Was willow planting a strategic moisture control technique or just an aesthetic choice that accidentally worked? Were certain chinampas reserved for ceremonial use only? No one knows for sure. Some say yes. Some say maybe if you squint. As you drift past another garden, you spot a small shrine tucked among the maize. It's no taller than your knee, just a painted stone with offerings of cacao beans and feathers. Someone's been praying for good weather. You hope the rain gods are in a good mood because you forgot your umbrella. And then you realize you're not just learning about chinampas. You're floating through a living world designed to feed, sustain, and connect every part of Aztec life. These gardens weren't just farms. They were classrooms, marketplaces, temples, date spots, and sometimes, yes, places to just be alone and listen to the frogs. One frog croaks now, as if on cue. Another answers. Somewhere, a heron flaps off into the haze, dragging your thoughts with it. The sky's turning pink, and you, drifting gently on your boat, feel the first real pull of the floating world. You exhale. There's more to see. So much more. But for now, let the water carry you a little farther in. You're still drifting. The sun is climbing now, soft and golden, turning the lake into a shimmering patchwork of light and ripple. You trail your fingers through the water. It's cool, surprisingly clean, though you try not to think about what's lurking under the surface. Probably just some ancient mud, a fish or two, and, if rumors are to be believed, a few lost sandals and forgotten prayers. Ahead, the chinampas stretch like an endless quilt, neatly squared off plots separated by narrow canals, each one teeming with life. This is the beating green heart of the Valley of Mexico. Time to take a closer look. A farmer waves you over. He's elderly, though the sun and wind have worn him into something more like polished bark than wrinkles. He stands barefoot on a chinampa, its edge reinforced with woven reeds and willow stakes. You step off the canoe. Carefully, this is not a time for dramatic tumbles, and feel the surprising solidity beneath your feet. For a floating garden, it's remarkably unsinky. Welcome to the chinampa, the not-so-floating miracle of the Aztecs. These gardens aren't floating like rafts. That's a common misconception. They're more like anchored rafts that gradually became part of the lake itself, built up over time with patience and mud, like someone growing their own private island with compost and love. The base starts with a frame of ahueyote willows, the MVPs of the chinampa system. Their roots reach deep, weaving into the lake bed and holding everything together. They're also great shade providers, windbreakers, and occasional gossip listeners, depending on who's whispering under the branches. Then comes the layering. Sticks, reeds, aquatic plants, and thick lake muck known as tepitate. The Aztecs dredge this up regularly, slathering it onto their plots like cake frosting. It's gooey, nutrient-rich, and slightly suspicious smelling. But it worked. It made the soil fertile and helped anchor the whole structure. You walk slowly along the edge of one plot, trying not to disturb the rows of maize growing in peaceful green formation. It's quiet here. Just the chirp of a bird, the occasional splash of a turtle falling off a log in a moment of pure clumsiness. The farmer gestures at a narrow ditch he's digging alongside the plot. "For drainage," he says softly, as if afraid to disturb the plants. The Aztecs were obsessed with water balance. Too much and the crops drowned. Too little and the soil cracked. They managed it by adjusting canal levels with wooden sluices and planting in raised rows like lazy ripples of earth. This setup wasn't just clever, it was industrial. Scholars estimate there were more than 20,000 hectares of chinampas ringing Tenochtitlan. That's an area roughly the size of modern-day San Francisco, all producing food at record speeds: tomatoes, avocados, beans, squash, peppers. Even exotic herbs and flowers like Sempo Alexochitl, the golden marigold still used today for Dia de los Muertos. Some chinampas specialized in food, others in ornamentals or medicine. And because the Aztecs practiced intercropping, planting multiple types of crops in the same plot, they minimized pests and maximized yield. Basically, their gardens had better teamwork than most office departments. But here's the fun part. Some archaeologists now believe that chinampas may have been pre-composting their own structure. That's right. The layers of lake debris and organic matter not only fertilized the plants, but slowly rotted down into the very foundation. It's like if your house cleaned itself by digesting last week's leftovers. Still, there's debate. Some scholars argue that chinampas needed regular dredging and couldn't sustain themselves without constant human effort. Others point to how long some plots remained fertile without outside input. Maybe both are true. Maybe the gardens were resilient because the people were relentless. You stop by a smaller chinampa, this one only a few meters wide. A child is planting seeds with exacting seriousness. One corn kernel at a time, perfectly spaced. You watch as he presses them into the damp soil, murmuring something under his breath. A chant? A counting rhyme? Or maybe just a kid talking to future corn. You notice how the air is different out here. Thicker, more fragrant, almost humming with quiet intent. You're not just walking through farmland, you're standing in a system designed to balance with the lake, to reuse everything, to grow what the city needs without ever overreaching. It's the opposite of conquest. It's cultivation. And yes, sometimes they sank, but rarely. Because the Aztecs weren't careless, they rotated crops. They reinforced their gardens with fresh willow stakes. They observed the seasons like old friends and knew when to dredge more muck or let a plot rest. One account from early Spanish sources even suggests that chinampas grew themselves, thanks to the richness of the lake and the cleverness of the farmers. A nice poetic thought, but probably overstated. These gardens took work. Quiet, deliberate, back-aching work. Still, there's something magical about how all of it comes together. The plants, the water, the quiet labor. You step onto your canoe again, pushing off with a gentle nudge from your pole. The chinampas fall away behind you, swaying slightly as if waving goodbye. You think about how different this is from modern farming. No engines, no fences, no chemical labels. Just mud, water, patience, and a touch of willow-rooted wisdom. And for a moment, you wonder if we've actually progressed, or just forgotten how to float. The canoe rocks softly as you drift onward. You haven't even scratched the surface yet. You're paddling now. Not with urgency, there's no rush here, but with that slow, meditative rhythm that lets your mind wander. The air is warmer, the mist has burned off, and the gardens stretch endlessly on either side. Each one slightly different. Each one carefully tended. Each one somehow still afloat. It's time to look a little deeper. Literally. You steer toward the edge of a chinampa where the structure is partly exposed, the water low enough to reveal the cross-section. You lean over the side of your canoe, peering into the submerged layers. It's like an archaeological lasagna. Reeds, branches, mud, silt, more reeds, compost, and lake muck layered into place over decades, maybe centuries. This is the engineering of the Aztecs, not flashy pyramids or dramatic statues. Just mud and plants and persistence. You spot a man waist deep in the canal, mucking around with a long-handled basket scoop. He's dredging the lake bed, harvesting silt to pile onto his chinampa. You call out a greeting. He grins, lifts the basket, and lets the heavy, dripping sludge fall in a perfect splat onto the plot. It smells like rich soil and something vaguely amphibian. This process right here, is what makes the system work. The farmer points to the edge where young willow stakes are growing. New border, he says. The willows, planted in lines along the chinampa's edge, do more than just hold it in place. Their roots bind the structure together. Their trunks become fences, shade, even future firewood. It's a design feature that also happens to be a tree. You step out and feel the ground squish under your feet again. There's a quiet confidence in this patch of floating earth, like it knows it's not going anywhere. Then you notice something else: the grid. These gardens aren't haphazard. They're arranged in a careful matrix, separated by acequias, straight canals that function both as irrigation and transit routes. Some even have underwater walls made of woven brush and clay bricks to hold their shape. Over time, silt fills in the cracks. Fish nibble at the algae. Everything stabilizes. You're walking on a kind of semi-natural, semi-artificial hybrid that's somewhere between a garden and a sponge. It's all rather beautiful, really. One scholar you once read claimed the chinampa system was hydraulic urbanism. Another insisted it was more of an ecological dance. Still another said flatly, these were just floating mud pies with good PR. Historians still argue whether the system was originally inherited from earlier civilizations like the Xochimilca, or if the Aztecs invented their version independently. Most agree it was a little of both, a remix of older traditions, scaled up to imperial levels. But here's where it gets quirky. Some of the earliest Spanish chroniclers were obsessed with the idea of floating land. They wrote about it with a mix of awe and mild panic, like they'd just discovered land that could sneak away while you were napping. A few even believed the chinampas moved overnight, drifting on the lake like lazy turtles. This is unlikely unless the willows took the night off. More probably, they were confused by small, unanchored rafts used to grow herbs or flowers that did float, called camelonus. Or maybe the Spanish were just prone to exaggeration. After all, they also thought armadillos were dragons. You crouch beside a farmer who's repairing a canal edge. She's weaving reeds into a mat, tucking it tight with practiced fingers. For erosion, she explains. You nod, pretending again to be the kind of person who always thinks about erosion. She laughs softly. Chinampas are like people, she says. They need boundaries and mud. She's not wrong. You look around. Everywhere, there's quiet movement. A boy washes gourds in the canal. A dog trots along a narrow plank laid across water. A pair of women trade seeds in hushed tones over a basket of chilies. It's not grand or dramatic, but it's profoundly alive. A passing canoe holds a small shrine. Feathers, a clay figurine, and a cup of water are carefully arranged at its bow. You ask someone what it's for. To bless the new garden, they say. The lake gives, but only if you ask nicely. You file that away, alongside the fact that at least one recipe from this era involved using powdered amphibian skin to protect seedlings from frost. Not exactly something you'd find on a Pinterest gardening board. As the afternoon sun begins to lean, the wind picks up slightly. You watch it ripple through the maize, bending the stalks in gentle waves. The water shimmers. You can almost hear the plants sigh. And it's here, amid the reeds and the rhythm of ore and earth, that you realize something else. The Aztecs didn't just build a farming system, they built a floating world, one that made room for plants, people, prayer, and practicality. One where the engineering was disguised as ecosystem. Where willows were architecture, and where a pile of mud, if treated right, could feed a city. You take one more look at the canal edge, marveling at how something so fragile could be so enduring. You paddle on. You float a little farther now, drifting between rows of green. The afternoon sun is mellow, turning everything golden and warm, like the world is wrapped in a sleepy tortilla. On either side of you, the chinampas are lush and abundant. Maize stalks towering, beans coiling like lazy snakes, squash blossoms unfurling like little suns. It's beautiful, peaceful, and just the tiniest bit pungent. You wrinkle your nose. There's a smell in the air, earthy, sharp. Not exactly unpleasant, but definitely not something you'd bottle as a perfume. The farmer steering your canoe chuckles and points to a pile of something brownish gray at the corner of a garden. Best fertilizer, he says proudly. You want your corn sweet? Use this. You take a closer look and then do a double take. That is not dirt. That's crocodile dung, yes. Tonight's charming trivia? Aztec farmers may have used crocodile droppings as fertilizer. To be fair, this is still debated. Some modern researchers think it's a misinterpretation of the Nahuatl word for fertile muck. Others are more convinced. Crocodile dung is nutrient-rich, and these waters were once thick with reptiles. Either way, it's the kind of thing that makes you appreciate modern gardening gloves. But crocodile contributions aside, Aztec agriculture was defined by innovation. They didn't have draft animals or metal tools. Yet their yields were astonishing. It's all thanks to a perfect storm of techniques. Intercropping, raised beds, constant composting, and that never-ending dredging of lake sediment. It's messy, it's labor-intensive, and it worked. As you drift past one garden, you spot a woman sprinkling ashes along a row of beans. Another nearby is mashing something with a stone tool. You ease closer and see her crushing dried fish into powder. Fish meal, rich in phosphorus, ideal for leafy greens. These people understood their soil the way some people understand wine, by scent, by feel, by instinct. You crouch beside a young man who's mixing something in a clay bowl. The smell hits you before you see it. Rotten food, animal waste, decaying plant matter. You lean back. He grins. "Compost stew," he says cheerfully, stirring with a stick. You nod politely and make a note to never accept dinner invitations from this guy. Still, it's impressive. Every scrap gets reused. Fish bones, maize husks, chili stems, even old sandals made from agave fiber. They all go back into the earth. The chinampa system doesn't waste. It digests. Some farmers even buried broken pottery under crops to help with drainage and pest control. Others experimented with crushed volcanic rock. And one particularly creative gardener, legend says, lined his planting rows with feathers and obsidian flakes to scare the evil spirits off the maize. Not super practical, but undeniably stylish. But the weirdest method? Human waste. Yep. The Aztecs weren't squeamish. Night soil was a valuable commodity, collected from latrines, dried, and distributed like brown gold. There were even specialists tasked with collecting it. Imagine explaining that job at a dinner party. "Oh, I'm in urban recycling." Very cutting edge. You glance at a pile of compost, half hidden behind a willow thicket. Steam rises from it in gentle curls. A lizard basks beside it, looking suspiciously smug. You wonder if he knows something you don't. As you glide onward, you begin to appreciate just how much science lived beneath the surface of these floating plots. The Aztecs may not have had microscopes, but they knew how to read their land. They watched the way plants drooped before a storm. They listened to the frogs. They noticed when the water changed color. They responded with mixtures, rituals, and sometimes, yes, poop. Historians still argue whether this deep agricultural knowledge was codified or passed down orally. Some glyphs suggest formal training. Others point to the household garden as the real classroom. What's clear is that by the time Spanish chroniclers arrived, the Aztecs had turned gardening into a kind of sacred choreography. Even their language reflects this intimacy. The Nahuatl word for to plant, Chashiwa, shares roots with the word for to create or to give birth. Every seed, every chinampa, an act of life-making. You drift into a narrower canal now, the air thick with the scent of marigold and chile. A heron stands knee-deep in water, utterly still, eyes locked on something beneath the surface. You wait, so does the heron. And in that long pause where nothing happens and everything is happening, you understand the rhythm of this world. It's slow, it's circular, it's alive. And just when you're about to move on, splash! The heron strikes, lifts a fish, and swallows it whole. Life goes on. One scoop of lake muck, one squash blossom, one heap of crocodile compost at a time. The sun's lower now, the shadow's longer. Somewhere nearby, someone's roasting corn over a fire, and the smell, thankfully, overpowers the compost. You paddle on, amused, maybe even a little enchanted. You've just met the unglamorous heroes of the chinampa system. Poop, patience, and plants. The sky begins its slow shift toward dusk, softening into that honey gold stage that makes everything glow. You squint toward a distant chinampa where someone is lighting a small cooking fire. The smoke curls upward, fragrant with maize and wood. It's dinner time for some. For you, it's time to follow a day in the life of the people who made all of this green abundance happen. You paddle closer to a narrow walkway, just a few planks nailed together spanning 2 chinampas. A farmer is finishing his afternoon routine. His tunic is splattered with mud, his feet are dark with lake sediment, and his face is the kind of weathered that only comes from knowing exactly where the sun will hit every hour of the day. You join him. He doesn't mind. In fact, he waves you over like you're late for work. He rises early before dawn. Always before dawn. The lake at that hour is silver and still, the air chilled, frogs still croaking. He starts by checking his plot, every corner, every plant, every whisper of rot or insect damage. He doesn't need a clipboard. His hands are his data. He'll scoop up sediment from the canal, layer it where the soil looks thin. He notices one of the willows leaning too far, its root bundle starting to pull away. Out comes a rope made from twisted maguey fibers. A few firm tugs. Re-secured. Good for another season. He moves to the maize. Some stalks have grown too close. He pulls a few, muttering to them like they're over-eager children at a festival. Then it's on to the chilies. The leaves are drooping slightly. He makes a note in his mind to divert more water tomorrow. And here's a surprising twist. Many chinampa farmers multitasked as priests. They didn't just tend crops, they tended meaning. Every action was part ritual, part routine. When he scatters seeds, it's with his right hand first. When he finishes a row, he stops for breath and thanks Tlaloc, the rain god, with a pinch of amaranth tossed into the canal. Now it's mid-morning. His wife arrives in a canoe, her lap full of tamales wrapped in maguey leaves. She hands him one, then pulls out a clay vessel of atole, a warm, maize-based drink that's equal parts breakfast and comfort blanket. You sip one too. It's thick, gently sweet, and faintly smoky. The kind of drink that makes you forget you're standing ankle-deep in damp soil. The children come next. 2 little ones with reeds in their hands pretending they're spears. They're not very helpful, but they're learning. Where to walk, how to spot pests, how to avoid stepping on the squash. Occasionally one will squeal and leap aside from a lizard or beetle. The father doesn't scold. He just smiles, gestures at a frog, and says, "That's your real teacher." Midday is the slowest. The sun hits hard. Everyone finds shade beneath the willows or under thatched awnings strung between stakes. You lie down too, letting the breeze sweep across your face, carrying with it the scent of herbs and lake water. You watch a woman sort dried beans into shallow baskets. Nearby, another smashes herbs with a stone, creating a paste for insect bites. Everyone does something. Everyone knows something. Later, he prunes his tomatoes. He doesn't measure acidity or sugar content. He tastes one. Nods. Spits a seed into the canal. The tomato's lineage will float on. Throughout the day, neighbors drift by in canoes, exchanging greetings, tools, and news. One woman trades a bundle of marigolds for a net of small fish. Another shares a folded cloth with herbs stitched inside. Protection for her maize, she says. Is it science? Is it magic? The line is blurry here and frankly irrelevant. The sun begins its descent. Shadows stretch long over the water. Our farmer gathers the day's harvest. Chayote, tomatoes, a handful of herbs, and one awkwardly shaped squash that he holds up proudly like a trophy. He loads them into the canoe. His wife has already taken most of the produce to the market earlier, but this smaller load is for neighbors, small trades, and maybe a late dinner. As he pushes off, you notice the way he moves. Not with urgency, but with rhythm. He's not rushing home. He's floating home. The garden behind him still hums, a quiet chorus of crickets, frogs, and rustling leaves. You stand on the empty chinampa, now slightly cooler in the fading light. You imagine repeating that day. Not once, but thousands of times. Every season, every cycle. Each day slightly different, but all shaped by the same quiet routine of tending, listening, adjusting. Historians sometimes debate how specialized chinampa farmers were. Did they only farm or also participate in politics, religion, even warfare? The answer is likely yes to all. Life wasn't compartmentalized. A farmer could offer produce at a market in the morning, train in a military drill after lunch, and perform a harvest ritual before dinner. It's the kind of balanced, holistic lifestyle that modern wellness blogs might try to rebrand with a fancy logo and a $400 monthly subscription. But here, it was just life. You paddle on, a little quieter now, your boat brushing the surface of the canal, sending tiny ripples outward. It feels good to imagine a life where success is measured not in numbers, but in seeds that sprout and squash that doesn't sink. You breathe deep. That was only one day. There are hundreds more ahead. Evening has begun to settle like a soft blanket over the lake. The shadows are long and drowsy, and the surface of the water reflects the orange-pink hues of the sky like a living mirror. The chinampas, those quiet patches of cultivated floating earth, don't rest exactly, but they slow down. So do you. The air cools just enough to make your arms raise with a shiver. Somewhere close, someone is singing. Not a performance, just a tune carried lazily across the water, probably half sung out of habit. Maybe a lullaby, maybe a planting song. It's hard to tell, but it fits. You find yourself approaching another set of chinampas, but this time they feel different. Brighter, more colorful. They're thick with wildflowers, tall grasses, even a couple of curious hummingbirds darting between blossoms like tiny, frantic merchants. This isn't your average vegetable patch. Welcome to the floating gardens of biodiversity, the chinampas that fed not just stomachs, but ecosystems. Some were deliberately left semi-wild, planted with pollinator-friendly blooms like Kempo-Alxacatl and Sampantli. These gardens weren't an afterthought. They were essential. They attracted bees, butterflies, birds, and small amphibians that, in turn, fertilized crops, controlled pests, and contributed to the ecological balance. The Aztecs didn't invent permaculture, right? But you could argue they quietly mastered it centuries before the word showed up in a TED Talk. You crouch beside a shallow canal and peer into the water. It's busy. Minnows dart between the submerged roots. A frog rests on a lily pad with all the confidence of royalty. A duck glides by with the casual indifference of someone who's lived here longer than you. You paddle farther, and there, a boat draped in flowers. Not a practical one. Not for market. This one is decorative. Adorned with bundles of marigolds, lilies, herbs braided into the edges. Two women are arranging fresh blooms into elaborate garlands, laughing softly between handfuls. They're preparing for a small ceremony, they say. A blessing for a new chinampa, or perhaps an offering for a good season. In Aztec tradition, beauty and utility were often partners. A floating farm could be a feast for the gods and a source of tomorrow's lunch. One of the women offers you a flower. Xochitl, she calls it. You tuck it behind your ear because, well, when in Tenochtitlan, the ecosystem of the chinampas wasn't just about agriculture. It was a wetland wonderland. Egrets, herons, salamanders, turtles, and water snakes all shared space with the humans. Even tiny axolotls, those curious aquatic salamanders with fluffy gills and perpetual smiles, once thrived here in the stiller waters. You look down and half expect to see one wave at you. But no luck. They're shy, and besides, it's almost bedtime. You ease along another canal. A man casts a net from the bank. It lands with a plop, then silence. He waits. The fish here, Mojara, Carpa, Even tiny whitefish aren't large, but they're steady. Supplementary protein in a maize-heavy diet. Sometimes the chinampas were ringed with raised clay walkways or small rock piles that encouraged bird nesting. Insects were kept in balance not by sprays, but by frogs, fish, and predatory bugs that made these garden islands their personal buffet. One fringe account even claims that the Aztecs domesticated certain types of ducks to live on chinampas and serve as weed control. It's debated. Some scholars say there's no proof. Others point to duck bones found near known chinampa zones. Either way, it's a fun mental image. A brigade of tiny waddling gardeners patrolling for snails. And then, of course, there are the boats. Oh, the boats! The Aztecs were not seafaring, but they were masters of lakes and canals. Canoes of all shapes and sizes plied these waters. Cargo boats, passenger rafts, even floating kitchens during festivals. There are tales of lovers meeting in secret on garden boats lit only by torches, drifting between rows of marigolds whispering beneath the willows. Tonight you see one such boat glide past. Empty, save for a single clay lantern flickering inside. It's part of a ritual maybe, or simply a quiet expression of gratitude to the lake. You nod silently, respecting the moment. Historians sometimes argue whether this balance between human and ecosystem was intentional or accidental. Did the Aztecs engineer biodiversity, or did it arise naturally from their farming practices? Likely both. Intentional planting patterns, seasonal rotations, and respect for natural cycles suggest they knew what they were doing. Even if they didn't have scientific terms for it, you let your canoe coast just a few inches above the waterline, brushing against the reeds. A dragonfly lands on the bow for a moment, then darts away. You begin to feel something settle in your chest, an odd kind of peace. It's not that you want to live here permanently, the mud alone would ruin your shoes. But there's something deeply calming about a world that functions on gentle loops. Plant, harvest, trade, float, pray, sleep, repeat. A boy passes by in a canoe carved with crude fish shapes. He gives you a tired smile and holds up his net. One small fish, wriggling. Enough for supper. He disappears into the reeds. It's almost night now. The chinampas glow in the last light, edges blurring into the water, becoming something dreamlike. Not quite land, not quite water, not quite past. You keep drifting silently into the next garden. Night has almost fully arrived and a hush has fallen over the Chinampa canals. The sky above is deepening into velvet, with stars beginning to prick through like shy lanterns. The sounds have changed. Less bird chatter, more frog song, the occasional splash, a dog barking in the distance, but mostly peace. And then, from behind a willow-draped bend, comes a soft thrum of laughter. You follow it quietly, your canoe gliding soundlessly across the mirrored water. Around the bend is a scene that feels different. Not just farming, not just ritual. This garden glows with something else. There's a group gathered at the edge of a wide chinampa, lanterns hung from the low branches, the air tinged with perfume and spice. Two young men are playing a soft rhythm on handheld drums, and several women are seated with woven baskets of flowers and food. A bowl of cacao sits in the center, steaming gently. And right there, in the middle of it all, is a blushing young couple. Everyone is pretending not to notice, but also definitely noticing. You've stumbled upon a chinampa courtship. Yes, these floating gardens weren't only for farming. They were at times floating stages for the Aztec love story. You settle into the shadows, respectful, but curious. The scene unfolding is warm and familiar, even if the culture is centuries removed from your own. A young man offers a hand-woven pouch of dried herbs to the girl across from him. She opens it, smiles, and nods. This is a good sign. He doesn't faint. Also a good sign. In Aztec society, romantic unions, especially in rural and agricultural communities, often involved quiet gestures of offering. Not flashy declarations, but gifts of tamales, rare flowers, fresh produce from one's finest harvest. Love in this world was grown just like maize, season by season, with care and good timing. One chronicler even described how young men would weave special reeds into the shape of a heart, yes, centuries before Hallmark, then tuck it into a bouquet of Xochitl flowers to signal interest. If returned, the romance could bloom. If not, well, at least you had a useful basket. Some chinampas were reserved as dowry plots, land given to the couple for their future farming needs. It was both symbolic and practical. Here's a piece of the earth. Now grow something together. You spot an older woman handing the young couple a folded textile, probably filled with food, advice, and more food. Around them, the laughter continues, soft and teasing. Someone plucks a few notes on a reed flute. It's the kind of night where time feels sideways. You wonder for a moment about your own modern world, where dating apps and endless swipes have replaced flower boats and cocoa offerings. Maybe we lost something when we stopped dating in gardens. You paddle backward gently, letting them have their moment. But as you turn, you notice a detail that makes you smile. The entire chinampa is planted not with maize or squash, but with flowers. Rows and rows of blossoms in every imaginable hue. This isn't a food garden, it's a love garden. Grown for weddings, festivals, gifts, and moonlit courtships like the one you just witnessed. And yes, some of those flowers were edible too. The Aztecs were efficient like that. Why not be romantic and snackable? Floating onward, you pass another chinampa lit only by a single clay lantern. On it, two older figures sit side by side, legs dangling into the water. Not talking, just being. Not every romance here is young. Not every story needs music. But all of them somehow feel rooted in the earth and floating just above it. Historians still puzzle over how much free will Aztec youth had in marriage choices. Some evidence points to arranged unions, especially among nobility. Others suggest that among commoners, affection and mutual agreement were often present. Like much of history, the truth probably lives somewhere in between. You pause beside a stand of night-blooming Xochitl flowers. They open only in darkness, pale and fragrant, practically glowing under the moonlight. You close your eyes and breathe in deeply. This was a world where love didn't need marble statues or balcony speeches. It just needed good soil, patient hearts, and a place to float quietly in the dark. Your boat drifts farther now. Behind you, the laughter has faded. Ahead, the stars are brightening. You wonder how many couples have whispered secrets on these very waters. How many petals have floated here? How many shy glances were hidden behind baskets of squash? The lake keeps its secrets, but tonight you got to glimpse one. The moon is high now, casting a pearly shimmer across the water, turning the chinampas into something ethereal, half garden, half dream. You trail a hand in the water as your canoe drifts into another channel, this one quieter still. The hum of insects forms a rhythmic background, like the world itself is sighing softly into sleep. But even in this hush, life is moving, always moving, in tune with the cycles that govern everything here. Tonight, you're about to enter the slow, sacred calendar of chinampa life. The gentle choreography of seasons, rituals, and the gods who at any moment might decide the weather needs a little more chaos. You pull up to a small dock fashioned from flat stones and wood slats. The garden it leads to looks freshly tended, not a weed in sight. Neatly spaced rows, bundles of herbs hung out to dry. And at its center, a small stone altar ringed with offerings. Tiny gourds, bundles of amaranth, and what appears to be a perfectly intact chili pepper. This is not just a garden, it's a space of alignment. Aztec agriculture followed a sacred rhythm. The chinampa cycle wasn't just about planting when it was warm and harvesting when the corn looked fat. It was interwoven with the tonal pahuali, a 260-day ritual calendar, used to determine auspicious days for planting, blessing seeds, or even resting a plot to avoid the ire of displeased deities. Your guide for this leg of the journey is a soft-spoken man with calloused hands and bright eyes. He walks the edge of the chinampa with you, pointing to areas marked with colored feathers and stones. That corner, he says, was blessed last week. The moon was right, and I left Coco here for the May's spirits. You nod solemnly, not entirely sure whether to respond with a scientific question or a thank you. He explains how every season came with its own deity. Chicomecoatl, the goddess of agriculture, was honored during the sowing season. Tlaloc, the rain god, got tamales and flowers in the wetter months. And during the dry season, a lot of praying, some strategic weeding, and the occasional offering of a bird feather, or two, just to be safe. There was even a planting festival called Atlcahualo, dedicated to the blessing of crops and waterways. Children would bring offerings, flowers, small animals, foods, down to the canals accompanied by singing and dancing. It was joyful, messy, wonderfully human. You imagine muddy feet, dripping tamales, and priests trying to keep the toddlers from dropping sacred objects into the water. Seasonal knowledge was passed down orally and through demonstration. Parents taught children by letting them place the first seeds of the season or letting them dredge muck on holy days. You get the sense that time here didn't rush. It rolled, slow and circular like the passing of paddles through water. You lean down and touch a patch of newly tilled soil. Warm, alive. The farmer joins you and opens a gourd filled with something sticky and aromatic. Sap from a local tree, used to mark rows and seal seeds with intention. It smells like resin and hope. The Aztecs didn't separate the sacred from the agricultural. Their planting and harvesting days were often accompanied by rituals involving music, prayer, and food offerings. Even the tools had symbolic names. The digging stick, koe, was carved and decorated. Not just functional, but honored. You pass a hanging scroll of bark paper, likely used for recording planting cycles or lunar phases. The symbols are beautiful: spirals, maize kernels, stylized raindrops. No words as you know them, but a kind of poetry nonetheless. Historians continue to puzzle over the extent of calendrical precision in chinampa agriculture. Some believe it was highly structured, dictated by priest astronomers who tracked stars and days with obsessive care. Others argue it was more intuitive, passed through experience and observation. Either way, it worked. The proof lies in every ear of corn pulled from these floating plots, year after year after year. You hear distant singing again. This time it's a lone voice, humming what sounds like a lullaby. The farmer smiles. "That's for the beans," he says with a wink. "They grow better if they feel loved." You're about to laugh, but then you remember the earlier gardens, bursting with color and health. Maybe love is a kind of fertilizer. You help him tie back a row of amaranth with strips of dried grass. He works slowly, deliberately, talking to the plants as he goes. You copy him. Quiet words of encouragement. "You got this," you whisper to a particularly droopy leaf. "Don't let the weeds win." The moon shifts higher, bathing everything in silver. You rise to leave. The farmer places a hand on the altar, whispers something in Nahuatls, then hands you a flower. "Take it," he says. "For balance." You tuck it into your shirt pocket. Who are you to argue with a man whose crops answer to gods? You paddle off again, leaving the ritual garden behind. You feel calmer now, slower inside. Because in the chinampa world, time isn't money. It's maize. And some things just take the time they take. The night deepens, pressing in with a quiet comfort. The air is heavier now, cooler, and you can hear the change in the lake's rhythm. Slower ripples, longer pauses between sounds. Even the frogs have spaced out their croaks, like they're nodding off between verses. But not everyone is asleep. Ahead you hear the distant sound of voices. Not shouting, not laughing, Just that energetic hum that always seems to rise wherever people and produce collide. You found it. The Tlatelolco Market Zone. Even in the dark, even after a long day of farming and paddling, the Aztec economy doesn't sleep. Not entirely. Because trade, like farming and like prayer, follows its own cycle here. You arrive at a canal mouth lined with larger chinampas, many of them cleared of crops. These are the staging plots, the ones closest to the market city. They serve as halfway houses for produce, a place to sort, clean, repack, and sometimes snooze under a tarp while your neighbor argues about bean prices. You tie your canoe to a wooden post and step onto a packed walkway. Lanterns flicker, casting soft light on bundles of goods. Gourds filled with chili paste, woven mats rolled and stacked, flower garlands and baskets of squash, beans, herbs, maize, and more maize. Always more maize. You follow a young woman as she readies her chinampa harvest for trade. She moves quickly but not hurriedly, laying out her goods with practiced hands. Each item has a spot. Each basket is angled just so. This is both marketing and ritual. You get the sense her mother and her mother's mother arrange squash in the exact same way. As the goods are prepped, traders arrive by canoe. Some wear dyed tunics, others have baskets strapped to their backs. They chat softly, inspect goods, nod, and then begin to barter. No coins, not yet. This is still a world of trade by value. Chili paste for obsidian flakes, fish for firewood, flowers for cacao. It's a kind of conversation, not just commerce. You listen in on one exchange. A man is offering a duck and a gourd of honey in exchange for 2 baskets of tomatoes. The vendor raises an eyebrow skeptical. He adds a folded cloth and a handful of dried herbs. The eyebrow lowers. Deal. Historians note that while the larger Tlatelolco market, the empire's central hub, was massive and complex, there were hundreds of smaller floating markets like this one. Chinampa farmers often didn't travel all the way into the city. Instead, they sold their goods locally to traders who would go the distance. A kind of floating wholesale system. You wander further. One plot has been converted into a food stall of sorts. A woman roasts maize over a flat griddle. The smell makes your stomach growl in betrayal. She hands you a warm tamale wrapped in a corn husk. You bite in. Software steamy, a little spicy, and made no doubt from maize pulled hours earlier from one of these very gardens. Beside her, a boy tends a basket of zocolado, the bitter chocolate drink sacred to Aztec nobility. He pours some into a small cup for you, frothing it with a wooden whisk called a molinillo. It's strong, earthy, and vaguely electric. You try not to twitch. He smirks. Keeps you awake, he says. Too late, you realize that may not be what you want right now. You drift between plots turned vendor stalls. Some sell tools, digging sticks, reed baskets, stone grinders. Others offer small charms carved from bone or shell, likely meant to protect crops or cure headaches. One man, clearly a talker, tries to sell you a fish that is definitely not fresh. You politely decline. He shrugs, grins, and offers a marigold instead. You take it. That's 3 flowers tonight. You're starting to feel like a walking altar. As you stand there, watching this nocturnal commerce unfold, you're struck by how communal it feels. There are no neon signs, no shouted deals, no hard sells. Just slow movement, quiet trade, the occasional chuckle. It feels less like a market and more like a floating reunion. Historians still argue whether these kinds of side markets were officially sanctioned or informal. Some believe the chinampa markets had strict regulations. Others suggest they were more self-managed, with customs passed down verbally and enforced through community trust. Either way, they worked, for centuries. You step back onto your canoe with a small basket of tamales the vendor insisted you take for later. You don't argue. They're warm and your boat smells better now. As you paddle away from the market, the lights recede behind you, replaced by stars. The breeze picks up just enough to ruffle the canal. You trail your fingers in the water again. You think about how many generations have passed through this system. Planting, harvesting, paddling, bartering, eating. The economy of the chinampas wasn't just about food. It was about connection. A tomato wasn't just a tomato. It was an invitation, a story, a song from the earth, passed down from garden to kitchen to friend. You bite into one last tamale and smile. Yep. That squash was definitely flirting. You've drifted well past the floating market now, back into the quieter canals. Your canoe moves on its own, gliding in the moonlit current like a thought not quite finished. The tamale basket rests beside you, half empty and still warm. Somewhere behind, you hear the last laughter of a trade dispute resolved with a handshake and a gourd of honey. But ahead, stillness. You steer gently toward a long, uninterrupted chinampa where the air feels cooler, the silence deeper. This is not a garden for visitors or vendors. This is where the real magic happens. The daily, deliberate science of sustainability. Let's talk about the chill genius behind it all. Aztec farmers didn't call it permaculture, but that's basically what chinampa agriculture was. A regenerative, self-balancing system that did everything modern sustainable farming claims to strive for, without diesel engines, spreadsheets, or Instagram hashtags. You step out onto one of the plots and crouch down to inspect the soil. It's dark, moist, crumbly in a satisfying way. Not dry, not compacted. This is living earth. A mix of silt dredged from the lake, composted plant matter, ashes from cooking fires, and the occasional donation from the local ducks. Every part of the system connects. Waste becomes soil. Soil feeds crops. Crops feed people. People return organic waste to the canals. The canals support fish. The fish fertilize the water. The water seeps back into the chinampas. And so on. It's an elegant loop, like the universe saying, "See? It's not that hard." You follow a narrow path around the garden, noticing subtle variations in planting. Taller crops like maize are in the middle rows where they'll cast shade in the heat of the day. Lower crops, like beans and herbs, hug the edges, where they get reflected sunlight off the water. One row ends in a tidy wall of rocks and reeds, shaped into a little terrace. It's not there for looks. It slows erosion, keeps the soil in place during storms. Some chinampas even had built-in trenches underneath, filled with aquatic plants that filtered runoff and reduced nutrient loss. You'd need a lab report to track that today. Back then, all it took was observation and listening. You pause by a plot where chili peppers grow in satisfying little rows. They're spicy, not metaphorically. You rub your fingers along one and then remember that touching your eyes now would be an act of historical self-sabotage. Best number. A boy nearby gathers quilites, edible greens often considered weeds in other places. Not here. Here they're part of the diet, part of the system. High in vitamins, easy to grow, no fuss, no pesticides. Just a handful of lake muck, a little sun, and the occasional frog who thinks it lives there rent-free. He offers you a bunch. Good for soup, he says. And stomach trouble. And goats. You nod respectfully. Any food that works for you and your goat is probably a keeper. You walk along the canal edge where a net is hung, half submerged, catching floating debris. It's not trash. It's compost to be. Even algae gets scooped up and dried for use as mulch. Not glamorous, but effective. There's a myth that the chinampas never needed fallow periods, that they could produce perpetually, 7 harvests a year forever and ever. Some say yes, others say no. Modern researchers who've studied surviving chinampas note signs of nutrient fatigue, meaning even these miracle plots needed rest now and then, just like the farmers who worked them. Still, the yields were phenomenal. 1 hectare of chinampa could produce enough maize to feed 5 people. Add beans, squash, chilies, and amaranth. And you're looking at a complete diet with variety, color, and just enough spice to make life interesting. As you pause beside a clay water pot used for irrigation, you start to realize that nothing in this space is wasted. Broken pottery is turned into drainage. Old canoes are buried under new garden plots to become base structure. Even old prayer offerings, feathers, bark scrolls, clay beads, are quietly composted into the next season's soil. The Aztecs believed in cycles, birth, death, rebirth. It wasn't just philosophy, it was how they farmed. You remember an earlier garden, the one with the singing and the flower courtship, and it makes you smile. Because now you see how even love and food weren't separate. They were all part of the same spiral, the same gentle ecosystem. A breeze picks up, rustling the maize stalks. Somewhere nearby, a fish breaks the water's surface with a quiet plop. You sit for a while, just listening. The kind of listening that doesn't rush to label everything, but just notices. That's what these gardens teach. Pay attention, reuse, respect the loop, and maybe don't fight the mud. It's probably smarter than you. Before you leave, you spot a tiny shrine at the edge of the chinampa, hidden in the reeds. It's no bigger than a shoebox. Inside are offerings. A handful of beans, a clay bead, a tiny feather. You add your own gift, one of the marigolds from earlier, now slightly wilted but still fragrant. The gods of balance, you think, might appreciate that. The moon has begun its descent now, and the stars blink more slowly, as if yawning overhead. The water, ever a mirror, glows with their reflection. You find yourself drifting again. This time through a chinampa plot that seems to be dedicated almost entirely to food folklore. You don't spot it immediately, but you smell it. Roasted maize, ground chocolate, something fermented and fruity and possibly alcoholic. You pull alongside the plot and step out. It's narrower than the others, but vibrant. There are rows of herbs you don't recognize. Bean plants trained upward like little green ladders, and bundles of maize hanging from an overhead frame to dry. The woman tending this plot is older, her face creased, her eyes sharp. She stirs something thick in a clay pot, glancing up with a smile that says, "Oh, good, just in time." Tonight, you're not farming, you're tasting. The Aztecs didn't just feed their empire, they flavored it. Their culinary system was as layered and interconnected as the chinampa grid itself. You settle cross-legged near the pot. She hands you a small bowl of something warm, spiced and unfamiliar. "Tlaxcali," she says. "Tortilla." Then adds, "For you, Soft." You take a bite. It's chewy, slightly charred, and deeply satisfying. Aztec food was built around maize, but not just in the bland, boiled corn on the cob sense. They treated it like a sacred ingredient. Maize could be soaked, ground, fermented, steamed, baked, boiled, or even popped. The woman shows you another dish, tamale or tamale, filled with pumpkin seeds, squash blossoms, and a hint of chile. You savor every bite, because somehow, in this quiet garden at night, it feels like eating history. Nearby, a younger man tends to a fire under a ceramic pot. He's making a tolik, the thick maize drink you sampled earlier. This one smells of vanilla and cinnamon. The steam curls into the air and you catch yourself leaning in, hypnotized. Then he grins and says, "Careful. You dream too much, it boils over." You laugh softly. That's 2 life lessons in one sentence. As you sip, the older woman begins to share stories about gods who gifted maize to humans, about how amaranth was used in rituals, sometimes shaped into edible statues of deities, later banned by the Spanish for being too suspicious, about cacao, the bitter, frothy drink served to nobility and warriors alike. She hands you a cup. It's dark and sharp, not sweet. This was the real deal. Aztecs sometimes spiced it with chili or flowers or even cornmeal. Served cold or warm. Always ceremonial. You try to hide your face as the bitterness hits, but she sees it and chuckles. "First time, she says. Don't worry, your mouth will learn. Historians debate the precise composition of these traditional foods. Were they purely sustenance, or did each recipe carry symbolic weight? Most agree it was both. A tamale wasn't just dinner, it was wrapped meaning. The folds, the fillings, even the way it was steamed in a clay pot reflected the cook's intent. The season, the ritual calendar. She invites you to grind some maize on a metate, a stone slab shaped to cradle grain. You kneel beside her and push the mano or grinder back and forth. It's harder than it looks. Your shoulders complain instantly. She laughs. You eat maize, you earn it. And the smells. Oh, the smells. Smoke. Earth. Spice. Every herb has a story. Epazote used to flavor beans and repel insects. Hojasana, sacred leaf, wrapped around fish and whispered over before meals. Even flowers were edible, like the creamy petals of squash blossoms, used in stews and tamales or hibiscus, steeped into tart, red drinks. You walk around the garden and see more than crops. You see memory. Each plant is a chapter. Each meal, an archive. Recipes passed through generations, shaped by geography, season, belief, and flavor. One fringe tale she tells, Yanai quietly so the gods don't overhear, is about a chinampa that grew only blue maize. It was said to bring clarity to dreams. A noble once ate a tortilla from that patch and slept for 3 days, awakening with a prophecy that no one remembered, but everyone feared. You ask what happened to the chinampa. She shrugs. Maybe it moved, she says. That answer is more mysterious than helpful. You return to the fire, now lower, embers glowing. She presses another tamale into your hands, this one sweet, filled with crushed fruit and honey. As you eat, you glance at the water and see your reflection, lit by fire and moonlight. And you think about how we all carry tastes from the past. Sometimes in memory, sometimes in the mouth. A flavor that reminds you of something you've never lived, but somehow still miss. You thank her and stand. Your hands are sticky. Your heart is full. As you step back into your canoe, she calls after you, Take the squash blossom. It's for dreaming. You do. You cradle the squash blossom carefully in your lap as your canoe glides away from the garden. The taste of tamale still lingers on your tongue. Sweet, soft, ancient. The blossom is delicate, almost translucent in the moonlight, like something not entirely of this world. You lean back, let the boat drift, and let yourself wonder, if a flower can carry a dream, what else can? The answer, as it turns out, is weather. Because for all the calm you felt tonight, for all the floating and nibbling and listening, there's one thing the Aztecs never took for granted. One thing that could turn a chinampa into a soggy disappointment or a cracked ruin in less than a season. The rain. Or the lack of it. You glide into a quieter, more exposed area of the lake now. The chinampas here are farther apart, the water wider. You pass one plot partially flooded. Water pooled around the roots of the wilted squash. Another looks dry, its soil cracked like old skin. These are not neglected gardens. These are battlefields in the slow, never-ending war with nature. The Aztecs knew the lake was both ally and threat. It gave, yes, but it also tested. Too much rain and the chinampas could drown. Too little and the delicate system of hydration and fertility began to crumble. So how did they keep the gardens from sinking or shriveling? Cleverly, and with a lot of willows. You coast beside a garden edge reinforced with thick willow trees, their roots spreading like fingers through the underwater mud. These ahuejote were the anchors, literally. Planted along the borders, they absorbed excess water, reduced erosion, and kept the shape of the chinampa intact. Some even say they whispered when storms were coming, though that might have just been wind and a poetic farmer. Next to one chinampa, you see a man digging a channel with a curved wooden tool. Not a spade exactly, more like a scooping paddle. He's redirecting water, guiding it out of a soggy plot toward a deeper trench. You ask him if this happens often. After the rains, he says. Always after the rains. He gestures to a pile of woven mats. These are emergency barriers, he explains, laid over the soil to slow runoff and keep the crops from washing out. Primitive sandbags, you think, but more elegant, more natural. Historians note that many chinampas had internal drainage systems, layers of reeds and gravel to encourage water flow, and clever trench work around the borders. Some even had slightly raised mounds within the plot, giving plants the option to move uphill if flooding came. It wasn't waterproof, but it was water smart. Still, it wasn't perfect. You pass a half-submerged shrine, its offerings floating nearby. Petals, feathers, a small clay doll now bobbing like a ghost. It's a reminder that no system, no matter how beautiful, can escape nature entirely. But the Aztecs didn't just react. They planned. They watched the skies. They consulted priests, astronomers, and frog song. The arrival of certain birds, the pattern of stars, even the length of shadows, all held clues to the coming rains. It was science and spirit, intuition and probability. One recorded ritual involved the offering of childlike effigies to Tlaloc, the rain god. These were made from amaranth dough shaped lovingly and decorated with feathers and beads. Sometimes real children were involved too. But let's not dwell on that. Not tonight. Let's stay with the dough figures. They at least tasted like something festive before being gently floated into the lake. You steer toward another chinampa, a drought garden, someone once called it. It's elevated slightly, built with thicker soil and plants more tolerant of dry spells. Beans, amaranth, and cactus-like greens dominate here. They're tougher, wirier, less flashy, but they survive. Beside the plot, a woman waters her maize using a hollowed-out gourd, dripping water precisely into the base of each stalk. She doesn't waste a drop. When you ask if it's a dry season, she nods. "We make do," she says. "We grow what listens." The phrase stays with you. You pass another garden where the canal is nearly dry. The bottom is visible. Mud, discarded husks, a frog slowly realizing it's time to relocate. Yet even here life persists. A few stubborn plants, deeply rooted, refuse to wilt. You paddle on, wondering how many centuries of weather these chinampas have endured. Floods, droughts, earthquakes, colonial conquest. And yet, in some corners of Mexico City, they still exist. Quietly, persistently. Historians debate why they lasted so long. Some say the lake's natural fertility helped. Others point to the community-driven maintenance, the shared knowledge, the rituals, the mutual reliance. Some claim the design itself was just too good to fail. A mix of all three, probably. You float under a low-hanging willow, its leaves brushing your shoulders like a whisper. Grow what listens. Maybe it wasn't just about plants. Maybe it was about people. Systems, entire civilizations. Listening to the land instead of forcing it. Adapting instead of extracting. Your canoe slows in a patch of reeds. You pause there, the air still around you. Somewhere nearby, a fish jumps. Somewhere farther, thunder rolls faintly in the mountains. The storm won't come tonight, but when it does, the chinampas will be ready. They always are. The wind is shifting now, not stronger, just different. Cooler. It carries the faintest scent of smoke and something metallic. You sit upright in your canoe without knowing why, like a whisper has nudged your spine. And then you see it. A figure in the distance, two actually, paddling not with the fluid rhythm of a farmer, but with awkward, jerky strokes. Their clothes are unfamiliar, heavier, made of materials that don't belong to this place. Their canoe is not reed or wood, it's carved differently, armored in parts. You've arrived at the moment when everything begins to change. The Spaniards have come paddling in. It's the early 1500s, and the floating world of the chinampas is about to meet a foreign force that neither understands nor appreciates its delicate balance. As you continue down the canal, you feel the shift, not just in the water, but in the silence. Fewer voices, tense glances, farmers pausing, watching the horizon. Tenochtitlan's glory is still intact, but not for long. You arrive at a chinampa where a man is stacking his produce oddly, packing it tighter than usual, glancing up often. His son helps him silently. The woman beside them ties bundles of herbs so quickly the twine nearly snaps. You ask quietly what's going on. They've taken the outer gardens, and he says, "We move what we can, tonight." He doesn't say more, he doesn't have to. The Spanish had entered the Aztec Empire with a mix of awe and ambition. When they saw Tenochtitlan, this shining city of canals, floating farms, and stone temples, they were stunned. Some thought it rivaled Venice. Others called it a dream. But admiration was fleeting. The chinampas, for all their beauty and balance, were seen as curiosities. Not worth preserving, not worth understanding. When the siege of Tenochtitlan began in 1521, the canals became battlegrounds. Canoes once filled with maize and marigolds were suddenly used for troops, for supplies, for escape. The floating gardens, so carefully arranged, season after season, became collateral. You arrive at a chinampa, already abandoned. The crops remain, half-harvested. The altar still stands, but the offerings are scattered. A gourd lies broken. A child's reed toy floats nearby, gently spinning. It's heartbreak in still life. Some reports describe how the Spanish, unfamiliar with the land and dismissive of the local systems, let the chinampas rot. Others say they dismantled them intentionally to make room for European-style farmland. Some were flooded during the chaos, others burned. You crouch beside a broken edge of one plot. The willow roots are charred. Soil, once rich and black, is muddy and slumped. A shallow grave of vegetables, and yet you paddle farther and come across something unexpected. A family still tending their garden. The grandfather stoops over his chili plants, muttering. His daughter waters herbs. A small child waves at you, proudly showing off a tiny bundle of amaranth. Their canoe is tied loosely, ready to go, but not yet leaving. You ask them why they stay. It still grows, the daughter says, almost defensively. It still listens. That phrase again. You look around. The garden is smaller now, but thriving. Beans twist up reeds. Marigolds bloom stubbornly. The willow trees are scarred, but they hold the borders. In the chaos of invasion, the chinampas endured where they could. Not all of them. Many were destroyed, but some tucked themselves away in the shallows in hidden corners. They didn't need empires to survive, just water, mud, sunlight, and hands that knew what to do with them. You paddle away from the family with a kind of reverence. Behind you, the noises of conquest rise faintly. Shouted Spanish commands, the clatter of armor, the muffled pounding of retreating feet. But ahead, still water. More gardens, a few lanterns glowing. You wonder how something so delicate could survive something so brutal. But maybe that's the thing. Chinampas were never delicate. They were resilient, flexible, quietly unyielding. And when the empire fell, when the temples crumbled and the markets emptied and the gods were renamed, the chinampas didn't argue, they just waited. And slowly, in some corners, they came back. You breathe deeply now, letting the air fill your chest. The scent of the storm is gone. The smoke is behind you. Ahead, the reeds rustle. The water waits. The night is older now. The stars lean heavy overhead, and the moon has shifted to a cooler, more reflective silver. You can feel the hush of the world, like it's tucking itself in. But you're not quite done. The wind carries something different now, not smoke, not spice, not maize, but something quieter, earthier, like memory. You're entering the space between past and present. Here in the southern boroughs of modern-day Mexico City, the remnants of the chinampa system still breathe. Not many, not loud, but they're here. threaded through the district of Xochimilco, where the canals twist like half-remembered stories and a few floating gardens still bloom in defiance of centuries. Your canoe nudges against a newer chinampa, part tradition, part revival. A group of farmers in faded jeans and baseball caps work by headlamp, their hands still muddy, their hearts still tethered to something older than concrete. They nod as you approach. One offers you a thermos of hot atole, modern cup, ancient warmth. You sip, feeling the familiar thrum of maize and cinnamon. The man beside you says simply, "Still grows." These aren't recreations, they're continuations. Over the last few decades, there's been a resurgence, a quiet grassroots movement to bring the chinampas back. Farmers, conservationists, teachers, and elders joining forces to reclaim the floating gardens. Not for show, for food, for culture, for balance. You drift beside one of these restored plots. It's beautiful and alive in every sense. Tomatoes in tidy rows, nasturtiums spiraling across trellises. Lettuce so green it glows in the lantern light. Ducks paddle between the plots, eyeing you like they're part of the security team. One young woman kneels beside a compost bin, flipping it with a stick. She waves with her free hand and says, "Permaculture before permaculture." Then she shrugs. "Only now we tweet about it." You smile. It's not disrespect, it's pride. The modern chinampa projects blend tradition with innovation. Some use hydroponic techniques alongside ancestral practices. Others incorporate solar-powered pumps, natural pest repellents, and GPS mapping of soil health. But the heart of it remains unchanged. Mud, water, patience. You stop by a plot where children are planting beans. Their instructor, a woman with graying braids, teaches them in Nahuatl and Spanish, explaining which plants help each other grow and which ones prefer to gossip from separate rows. The kids laugh, but they listen. Historians used to think chinampas were gone forever. A relic, a romantic footnote. But here you are, standing in the present, surrounded by futures planted with ancestral hands. You pass a wooden sign staked into one plot. Aquí no termina. Aquí respira. Here it doesn't end. Here it breathes. You paddle onward, quieter now, thinking about how so many things seem to disappear, but actually just wait. The canals wind again, and you see the signs of urban sprawl creeping close. Buildings, streetlights, the distant hum of engines. And yet the chinampas remain, like green islands in a storm of cement. Some are messy, some are half-drowned, but others thrive. There's talk among scholars, farmers, and food activists about the future. Could chinampas help combat urban food insecurity? Could they restore balance to flooded cities, offering green space and water filtration? Could the answers to modern problems really be floating quietly in the shadows of the past? Maybe. But tonight, it's enough to know they're still here. You find a resting spot near a restored altar. Modern clay mixed with old stones. Offerings sit there. Flowers, beans, a worn feather, a folded receipt from a corner store. It doesn't clash, it just fits. Because even history evolves. You step out of your canoe and sit at the chinampa's edge. The water laps softly. A bird calls once and then goes silent. Someone nearby hums an old tune, the same kind you heard back at the start of this journey. You look down at your reflection. It's framed by willows, dappled with stars. And behind your eyes, you feel the weight of all the footsteps before yours. Those who farmed, floated, fought, and found beauty in mud and maize. Not just a system, not just agriculture, a culture that learned to bloom between the cracks. It's nearly dawn. The air has that pre-sunrise chill, soft and whispering, like the lake itself is taking its last breath before morning. The stars are beginning to fade. The water is still. Too still, like it's waiting for permission to ripple again. You float quietly now, your paddle barely touching the surface, drifting past chinampas caught in half light. Shadows stretch long, blurring the line between garden and reflection. And as you pass one final patch of floating earth, you see something that stops you. A woman kneeling in the soil, head bowed, her hand resting gently on the stem of a maize plant. She's not tending, not harvesting. She's just being. You pause. And in that silence, it feels like the whole night wraps itself around this moment. Every frog, every drumbeat, every whisper of willow, every taste of tamale. All of it converges into a single truth. This floating world is a conversation between land and lake, between human and season, between now and then. You watch as she rises, stretches, and smiles at her small plot. Then she walks slowly to her canoe, climbs in, and pushes off without looking back. You follow. Together you drift toward the center of the lake. The sky lightens to blue-gray. The water turns soft gold. Birds begin to stir. Egrets, herons, the bold little ducks who always seem to be 5 minutes early. The woman disappears down a canal and you continue alone. And here, in the calmest part of the lake, something settles inside you. Maybe it's the rhythm. Maybe it's the mud. Maybe it's the understanding that this entire civilization, this whole boring system of floating gardens, was never about spectacle. It was about knowing when to plant, when to harvest, when to rest, and above all, when to listen. You pass an old willow tree, gnarled and wide, its roots drinking deeply from the canal. You reach out and let your fingers graze its bark. It's rough and smooth at the same time. Anchored, constant, just like the chinampas. Historians still debate the details, how many existed, how deep they ran, whether they could truly sustain an empire. But those debates don't matter here, not now. Not in this moment of still water, whispering leaves and slow sunrise. Because you've walked the paths, felt the soil, sipped the atole, dreamed with the squash blossoms, and now it's time to rest. You let the paddle slip into the boat. No need to steer anymore. The current is gentle, the water is warm, and somewhere nearby a bird calls once. Then again, softer. The world is tilting toward day, but you are allowed to drift a little longer. So now as the last stars melt from the sky and the light begins to warm the water's edge, let your breathing soften. In and out. Feel your body settling, just like the silt in the chinampa beds, finding stillness beneath the surface. There's no need to think now, no need to paddle. The lake knows where to take you. Let your mind drift over the gardens you've visited tonight. The maize rows whispering in the wind. The flower boats bright and fragrant. The quiet figures tending soil with care and rhythm. You don't have to remember it all. The lessons are in your body now, in your hands that learned to grind maize, in your feet that felt the softness of floating earth. Let those memories sink gently like offerings on water, dissolving into calm. And if thoughts come, let them come like the ripples, brief, soft, and gone again. You are allowed to float. You are allowed to rest. You are held here between land and lake, past and now. In a moment, sleep will find you. It may come like a canoe across the water, slow and silent, or it may bloom like marigolds, wide and sudden. Either way, you are ready. The garden is planted, the night is full, and you are home. Sweet dreams. Sweet